Very good.
Now, can you hear me?
Very good. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening for our annual Redington Shores 2021 Hurricane Preparedness Workshop. We have some very, very excellent presenters tonight. We have with us from Spectrum Bay News 9, meteorologist Brian McClure, Indian Shores Captain Glenn Smith, Seminole Fire Rescue Chief Heather Burford. From Pinellas County, we have Sergeant Luckett and Corporal Nullenbach and Kim Haar from Haar Insurance Company. And I am Redington Shores Vice Mayor Michael Robinson, and I will be moderating tonight's discussion. And again, thank you all very much for joining us. With us also, working the background, is our Deputy Town Clerk, Sherry Zinders. Sherry will be handling any of you in the audience who have a question. Merely raise your hand by touching that icon on your screen that looks like a hand, and Sherry will call on you to move forward. Also with us, I know on the line is Mayor Mary Beth Henderson. So Mayor, thank you for being with us as well. Again, thank you to our panelists. The Federal Emergency Management Agency reports that 2020 tied both 1896 and 1985 for the most named storm landfalls in history. On top of that, Colorado State University, which has issued seasonal hurricane forecasts for 38 years, predicts a 65% chance of an above normal hurricane season. So here to help us understand what all this might mean to us, again, is Brian McClure from Spectrum Bay News 9. Brian, welcome. I know you can't predict with certainty what to expect from the weather, but I can tell you that weather forecasting seems to be a lot more sophisticated now than when I was a little kid watching weathermen paste a picture of the sun or a rain cloud on a felt back screen. And I, for one, am extremely impressed with what you do for all of us in this area. And again, appreciate the fact that you can be here with us. So if you could tell us a little bit from your perspective, how difficult it is for you to forecast these storms, what you can tell us, and most importantly, to remind people that it's important not to let our guard down.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a lot to cover every year, right, Michael? I mean, it's always one of those deals where you try not to cry wolf, but at the same time, you always try to deliver good, concise information. And by the way, can everybody hear me out there clear?
Yes.
Okay, I'm hearing nods. Good, Michael. Okay, I should have started with that, because one of the things I've learned, gosh, over the past year now, is we're using WebEx, we're using Zoom, we're using just about every single piece of technology, and they all work slightly different. So I just want to make sure everybody can hear us. If you want to, Michael, I can jump straight into the PowerPoint. We can go over what we had last year, and then we can get right into at the end. I put the beef of my talk at the end so I think that will generate questions, because it's more about the science of what we're seeing this season compared to last season and what might happen.
Perfect.
So
Perfect.
Why don't we try and share my screen? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So I'm going to try right now. Okay. And Michael, just make sure you can confirm that you are seeing my screen right here.
Yes, we are.
Okay, I'll go ahead and put it into slideshow mode then. All right. Okay, good. Okay, so yes, tons and tons and tons of hurricanes. I'm friends with a lot of the hurricane hunters that go out and fly through them. and they are always excited every year, and they don't seem to get burnt out like I do back here in the Weather Center. Well, even last year, they got burnt out. And I could tell even by, gosh, what was it? Late October, they were saying things like, oh my gosh, we do not want to fly anymore. And I thought, wow, I've never heard them say that, because of course it's amazing what they do. I mean, look at the views that they get and the things that they can do. First time that I can remember, at least, gosh, maybe since I've been working in this career, where we've had a warning of some sort, a tropical warning of some sort on every single county up and down the entire eastern seaboard. Now, keep in mind, that doesn't mean that everybody had tropical storm effects, like, places in New York and Maine and Massachusetts might not have, but they might have had a storm come close enough to them that they had a watch or a warning declared. And this was just one of those weird years. As you know, a lot of the storms tended to be concentrated in the north central Gulf region this year. There was a lot of talk about the named storms. I tend to be the type of meteorologist and media specialist that really tries to walk the fine line of warning people, telling them how serious tropical activity can be and how serious flooding can be, especially on our barrier islands. I've lived in coastal regions almost my entire life, so I understand how serious it is. But I walk the fine line between giving that message, but not hyping and not scaring people. And one of the things that I didn't like that I was seeing last year from a lot of the big media outlets, and this seems to be a pattern, the really big national media outlets like to go 30 storms, worst ever. And really what that was our technology is getting so much better that we can name a storm on the other side of the world with no problem. We have satellites everywhere. So when you instead look at it from an ACE standpoint, in other words, how much energy there was in the season, it really didn't stand up to some of the biggest seasons. You can see all the way back in the late 1800s, there were some that stood out. 1933 always seems to be king. If you ever have a tropical expert in the meteorology field, trust me when I say they'll tell you 1933 really stands out as like, wow, it was a massive year with tons of storms. But you can see there's a lot of high points in here. There's another one right there right around 50. There's another one right there around 60. There's another one right there around 80. There's quite a few through the 2000s. Remember, 04 and 05 were really bad. So yes, we had a lot of storms, but from an energy standpoint, we actually had lots of little tropical storms that would form, and our satellites were amazing. They could pick up on everything. I mean, a little swirl off the coast of Portugal, and it's like, oh, there it is. And we would name it, and everybody go, wow, that adds to the numbers. But look at the list, and you can see the accumulated energy. 1933 is above everything. When you see that far right-hand number up there, 258, that's just phenomenal. That is like, woo, that's a lot of energy in those tropical storms that year. And you come down the list, and some of these are going to pop out to you if you lived around here for any amount of time. We all remember 05. We all remember 04, the back-to-back, where Mike Clay and I always joke, we think those two seasons didn't even really end. They just kind of kept going. 04 never wanted to end, and 05 picked right back up the next May after we had just ended in December or January, and it just kept going. And that kind of goes in line with a theme that I'm going to talk about, by the way. You can see 1995, which actually that year is not talked a lot about. But I remember it vividly. That was the opal year that came right up through the north central Gulf region. And then you see 2020 down here. Was it a high energy year? Yeah, but definitely not outside the norm. These up here, whew, I do not want to get back to that 250 ACE. So there are all the storms. And what you'll notice is kind of a clumping of two areas. One, right there in the Gulf, north central Gulf. Man, those poor folks in Louisiana, they just kept getting hit, right? And then you'll also notice a big clumping out here in the Atlantic. And those are what us meteorologists call fish storms. We don't care about them other than ships. Nobody in the world really cares about them. Our researchers research them. They study them. Our satellites do a great job of picking up on them. But we always joke about it. It's like, yep, that's a fish storm. It's out there. So we started with Tropical Storm Arthur. There it was, right out in the Atlantic. Boom, not a big deal. Bertha, it was almost like a little shower. It popped up on the coast of North Carolina and South Carolina, from an old front in the early part of the season in May. And then it just got a little swirl to it and came right ashore, all in one afternoon. It was like that. Cristobal came right up from the Yucatan Peninsula, went due north, and they got some rain in Louisiana, and nobody really cared. Dolly, nobody cared. Edward, nobody cared. Tropical Storm Faye, nobody really cared. It was the weirdest thing. It was like we were just naming them left and right, boom, 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 and we're sitting here going, wow, this is a really weird season. We're just throwing these names out, and they were just like little rain showers passing. Nobody even remembers Gonzalo. It was down there south of the Windward Islands. And then all of a sudden we got to July 25th. Hannah pops up in the Gulf. Anytime something pops up in the Gulf in July, your eyes open up real wide and go, uh-oh, what's out there? Hannah luckily never really got that strong. It hit Padre Island, but it was peaking and it was just starting to intensify as it did make landfall. So although it wasn't a very devastating hurricane, the folks in Padre Island, it did kind of grab their attention because it was approaching as a tropical storm. And then it just kind of got its act together right as it was approaching the coastline. And they kind of went, whoa, those were actually some spicy winds there. So it did get to category 1, but it wasn't that big of a deal. August 4th, Isaias. Everybody remember the jokes on air about how do you pronounce that? It was another one of those storms where you didn't want to hype it because it was not a big hurricane, but it did damage. And it did result in big problems. I vacation every single summer where this one hit. So I had numerous friends and relatives calling me in North Carolina going, oh my gosh, what's it going to be like? And I said, well, it's a Cat 1. You'll be fine. But do the typical, take the precautions, get off the barrier island. I would shut the power off and head off the island, and just take your precautions. So here's the problem that they had. The storm wasn't the big deal. The big deal was most people left their power on and stayed on the barrier island, which we didn't really recommend and we don't recommend, but they stayed out there. Transformers started blowing. There started being electrical issues and there were fires. And of course, as you know, and actually we have some fire experts here on the call, you're not going to get response in the middle of a hurricane. And believe it or not, the local folks up there did try to respond within a few hours and do the best they could. But even they said, listen, it's a hurricane. We're not going to be able to do much. And so a lot of the homes just burnt down to the ground. The next morning, they called in from, of course, other towns to get the help. I think it was North Myrtle, Cherry Point, Wilmington. But by that point, the homes were gone. So they were really just helping to kind of, clean up. And this really made national headlines. And what was learned was people need to do a better job on those barrier islands of taking this stuff serious, which we all know this. We've talked about it every year. Every year we give these talks for all our barrier islands. We talk about how, again, we're not trying to scare people, but we need to take it serious. Only, I put the quotes on it, only a Cat 1, you can see the trees are fine. The roofs are fine. The buildings are fine. But they had catastrophic damage from fires. That's a perfect example of how something else can happen. So look, by the way, how it skipped across the street and got one home. I thought that was really sad too. So you've got these 3 homes and then it skipped across and it hit that home. And then the others, it doesn't even look like there was a hurricane. It looked totally untouched. Then 2 nights later, they had more fires, but not from the hurricane. It was from people leaving their golf carts and the cars underneath the homes, and the batteries caused problems. And then they started having like these little mini explosions and electrical issues. And so then, of course, in North Carolina, all their homes are on stilts. So all the golf carts and all the cars are underneath. So then they had more house fires. It really was just a really, really sad scene. So then you had situations like this where literally, look at this. All these homes are just fine. This one's actually being built right here, and this one's gone. And that was a common scene. I don't know why people didn't move their cars. I don't know why. I vacation there every summer, and they tend to be pretty savvy people. So I'm not sure if they just didn't take it serious because it was only a Cat 1, but only a Cat 1 easily, puts 3 to 4 feet of water across the barrier island. But that was a common scene. Cars just sitting in sand and water. And of course, we all know that causes problems. I don't need to tell you then, of course, then that caused issues down the road of, okay, now it takes longer to get everybody back on the barrier island. We have issues to deal with. So then we went along and we had TD number 10 way out by Africa. Not a big deal. Josephine, not a big deal in the Atlantic. Kyle, not a big deal in the Atlantic. Laura comes along. August 16th. As meteorologists, if you could ever see inside our weather center, we take lots of vacations in June and July with our family. And then we go into what we call hurricane blackout period by the second week of August. There's a reason why. That's because that's when stuff gets serious. June and July stuff, you usually get the little stuff that time of year. August is when you start to get the Cape Verde hurricanes, the big ones, the ones that can come all the way across the Atlantic. And Laura was the first one that season where we opened our eyes and went, uh-oh, this one could be bad. It missed us to the south. It stayed weak all through the island chain, but as soon as it hit the Gulf, it just went crazy. And we got really lucky. A lot of people, and this was also a problem with the media, the local media tends to do a better job with understanding local areas, local impacts, and they tend to be more of the experts. Kind of like when stuff hits here, we know how Redington Shores, Madeira Beach, how Gulfport will get hit versus maybe another area. The national media doesn't understand that. So after Laura hit, they were like, oh, it was no big deal. It was all hyped. And, I don't know why they made such a big deal out of that. Not only did that really hurt my friends at the National Hurricane Center because they're being labeled as misinformers, and they were not. Their forecast was dead on. But what people don't realize is the eye of Laura went pretty much right just south of Lake Charles. If it would have wobbled just 5 miles to the west, the water would have been shoved up towards Lake Charles instead of just to the east of Lake Charles. And if you've ever been down in southern Louisiana, there's pretty much desolate, swampy land with just small populations southeast of Lake Charles and southwest of Lafayette. So therefore, not only does it not get media coverage, there aren't many people that live out there, but you're not going to get a lot of reports, social media, pictures. You're not going to get that down there. But eventually, the National Weather Service did get down there. And when they did, they confirmed what we feared. The storm surge was over 17 feet. I mean, those are stilted homes, folks. And a lot of them are gone. And a little bit farther inland, I think it was about 2-3 miles from here, from this spot, there was a home, a brick home on the ground, and it was a 2-story home. So they were able to, it stayed. It didn't get knocked over. So they were able to actually go inside the home and see the high water mark, which is rare. Most of the time they fall over. And sure enough, it was over 17 feet. So here's the interesting thing about it. Not one single death there. Not one. Everybody left. Everybody took the precautions there. It's like the folks in Louisiana down there, they knew, uh-oh, this could be bad. We live in swampland. We better get out of here. So we were really proud of that fact. Well inland, yes, the wind damage took the media by storm. They were like, wow, the radars were obliterated, and wow, the windows were knocked out of the buildings. But they just kept talking about but the storm surge didn't come up here. So it's not that big a deal. Oh, it was a big deal. It was a big storm. Imagine if you took the 17-foot storm surge and put it in New Orleans or put it in Houston. They're both really close. Let me go back to the map. I mean, hello, Houston's not that far to the west. And there's New Orleans. So it hit in probably, I hate to say this, the best place it could have possibly hit for the least amount of destruction. And I can't say that on air. I can say it in our small group. But if I say that on TV, that makes me sound really horrible and inconsiderate. But the fact of the matter is there's only about 3,000 people that were in its path down there in South Central Louisiana. If it goes west or east, there's millions. There's Marco. It fell apart as it came up into the Gulf. There's Omar. No big deal. Nana. Nana was interesting. It did cause some flooding down in the Caribbean. And then it was one of those weird storms where its mid-level circulation held together, and it got a new name when it reformed in the Pacific. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people think, oh, yeah, once they leave the Atlantic, it's over. No, this is a very thin strip of land down there in Central America, and they can cross paths a lot. They can go back and forth. We have also seen it where they go from the Pacific to the Atlantic. They might not keep the original name because the original circulation might be destroyed, but then the moisture and the mid-level circulation might take over and a new storm can form. So that was kind of interesting. Paulette, it accumulated a lot of energy on the scale, but it just kind of twirled around out in the Atlantic. Nobody cared about it. Renee, nobody cared about it. Here comes Sally. Sally comes along and it blasts up through Gulf Shores, Alabama. This is a perfect example of what I think we need to be aware of around here. For anybody that's lived around here for any amount of time, you know what I'm talking about. It's not the Irma type that people won't listen to. No, they listen for Irma. It's the type that pops up quick. That's what we worry about. The type that maybe pop up down near the western tip of Cuba, the Yucatan Peninsula, and then come at us real fast. We're afraid that people won't listen because it's only a tropical storm. So Sally was only a tropical storm through most of its life, going across southern Florida, getting out into the Gulf. And we kept saying, hey, it's probably going to increase in intensity. The wind shear will back off. It will probably become a category 1 or a 2. We don't know which, just before making landfall. And we heard from so many people because we sent our reporters up there. We heard from tons of people when interviewing. Oh my gosh, we didn't expect it to be this bad. For some reason in the human psyche, they only pay attention to what it is now. So if it's a tropical storm, it's not a big deal, even though the forecast was on. And so the folks in Gulf Shores were really shocked. Was it catastrophic? No. But did it do damage? Yeah. It was, it was a Cat 2. It was an impressive hurricane. There's Teddy. It was falling apart as it went up to Newfoundland, but that's one of the reasons why there were tropical storm warnings all the way up there. There's Vicky, middle of nowhere. Wilfred, middle of nowhere. Alpha, subtropical storm Alpha. This is the one that people made fun of. And they said, okay, maybe our satellites have gotten too good when we're starting to help Portugal with the naming of subtropical storms. I got to admit, maybe we are. Tropical storm Beta came along. It flooded Houston again. Bless their hearts. It's kind of like New Orleans. When you build a city at the bottom of a mud hole, you're going to get flooded a lot. And so even though Beta was not a strong tropical storm, it flooded them again. Gamma didn't do a whole lot. And then here comes Delta. Poor Louisiana, although it wasn't the most catastrophic hurricane, it's Cat 2, and it hit Louisiana again. Epsilon out in the middle of nowhere. Zeta came along. It went right over New Orleans, but because it was weak, really didn't do a whole lot. But it garnered a lot of attention because as it went up through the Northeast, it connected up with a cold front, and it resulted in really strong winds and power outages in the Northeast. And so a lot of people talked about it like, whoa. And what a lot of people don't realize is the winds in a tropical storm can be shoved down when they combine with what we call a cold front or a mid-latitude cyclone. In other words, something coming down from Canada. And that's what happened. And so places up in New York and Pennsylvania, they were getting more power outages than they did down in Louisiana. It was kind of one of those weird things. And then, of course, our storm, Ada. Here we are in November. It's like, can we just get to fall, right? And Ada comes along. And Ada is the classic type of storm that, as meteorologists and as the local experts, you guys do this too. You tell your folks, hey, the end of the season is actually when we usually have the biggest potential for problems here on the west coast of Florida, because they can come up in the Caribbean where it's still really warm and they can smack us fast. Now, we were lucky in that Ada never really did get back to its powerful size like it was down in Nicaragua and Honduras. But even that being said, you and I both know it caused flooding right there at Redington Shores, at Madeira. These pictures were right there right there on the beach, right there on the boulevard. There's Gulfport. They had tons and tons of flood claims. So it had to do with trajectory. And we talked about that. We said, hey, it's not going to be the strongest storm, but it's going to parallel right along our coast. That's the worst thing that a storm can do because it shoves that water right up against us. If this storm would have been a stronger storm, this is the type of storm that worries us because it stays over the warm water, but we get the dirty east side. We get the storm surge shoved into the bay and shoved up against our coastline. And we get the rain and we get the tornadoes, we get it all. And if that water is being shoved up against our coastline and it's raining at Redington shores at the same time the water's being shoved up, there's nowhere for all the water to go. So we're lucky that one wasn't worse. And last I checked, around Madeira Beach and maybe even including some Redington shores, they were still trying to get everybody to file as many other flood claims as possible. And you can probably speak on that later, Michael. We ended the season with Theta out in the middle of nowhere and Hurricane Iota, which, by the way, one of the strongest hurricanes, maybe even was the strongest hurricane of the entire season in mid-November. But look how far south. That's why the water's still really warm in mid-November down there. And it absolutely obliterated some of the little islands between Colombia, Nicaragua, and Honduras and had devastating impacts. But it didn't garner a lot of national attention from us because they don't have a lot of national media down there in some of those poor areas. A lot of the season was driven by high pressure just north of us or very close to us, keeping the storms moving along. Other than Ada, most everything would come through and just pass on by and head towards Texas, head towards Louisiana. It was a common theme throughout the season. What we call the subtropical high sometimes, or the Bermuda high, depending on where it sets up, it can determine where the storms will go. And it kept setting up in our favor. Here's the ironic thing. I had numerous people coming to me in September and October saying, oh my gosh, it's so hot. I wish we'd get a cold front. And I kept saying, no, you do not. Because if we would have gotten a cold front in September, October, we might have gotten the Sally, the Laura, the Ada at the much stronger strength, the Iota, because they all would have curved up towards us. That high pressure saved us. And it was a hot late fall going into, or late summer going into early fall because of that high pressure. And there was Ada trying to come right up at us, and that high was fighting it. And that's why, do you remember how it came up towards Florida and then it got shoved down to the southwest and then it came back at us again? Because by the time you get that late in October, the cold fronts are coming across the country and eventually something's going to pick it up. One of those cold fronts is going to pick it up. And sure enough, the later we got in the season, that little L that you see there on the map, well, it's not little, coming out of New Mexico and Arizona and Texas, those are those mid-latitude cyclones or cold fronts essentially that start to pick up the hurricanes. And so you really don't want stuff that late in the season coming up out of the Gulf. So yeah, we had 30 storms. We had 14 hurricanes. 6 of them were major. There was your ACE, 184. The average ACE, by the way, is on the far right-hand side, 123. So all your averages are on the far right-hand side. Colorado State just put out their April forecast. Now, keep in mind, they will update it again June 1st, June 2nd, somewhere right in there. They always update it right at about the beginning of the season. And it's because I'll show you some things we're looking at right now that are global things, but there's no way we can determine regional things until we're within about a month. And preferably even 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, so Colorado State does a really good job of what we call hindcasting, going back and kind of pairing up past years. And so they're flat out saying, yeah, it looks busy again based on the global things that are happening right now. We also team up with a company called Weatherbell. We do a lot of graphical work with them. We do a lot of research with them. They're also calling for a busy season. So this really isn't that big of a surprise. Doesn't look like maybe as busy as last season, because keep in mind that last season, those tend to be the outliers. We get them. They just tend to be the spikes. Remember the chart I showed you at the very beginning of the talk? They tend to be the spikes. So here are what we call the analog years. You want to see the years that we think this year is looking like as far as conditions, as far as what is El Nino and La Nina like? What is the Pacific like, and what are the water temperatures in the Atlantic like? They are like 1996, 2001, 2008, 2011, and 2017. 17 was the year Irma came towards us. 96 was a really rough year for North Carolina. I was on the coast of North Carolina in 96. That's when Fran and Bertha came through there. So there are some years in there in those analogs where you kind of go, But if you look over here on the right, the ACE scores not too bad, except for 17. 2017, let's hope that doesn't happen again. At least, let me put it to you this way. Let's hope 2017 doesn't happen where the storms come towards land. Because remember, that was also Maria. That was Maria, that was Irma. Those were big storms that year. And see, that's the difference. You see that ACE right there of 225? You see that? That's big, folks. Everybody thinks that 30 storms this past year was big, but the ACE was only 184. 225 in 2017. What that tells you right there is those were big, big storms. And we all know they were. We got lucky with Irma that it weakened right as it came into Florida. So then what we do is we break it down into probabilities. And most of the world, especially America and American citizens, hate statistics. So if you're not a math person, you might want to ignore this part. But basically what we do is we start to break it down into math. There is a 96% chance that a tropical storm will come within 50 miles of Florida this season. Now, keep in mind that climatology right over here in this box is 86%. So we're not talking like, 96% is off the charts. It does kind of, scream at you like, oh, wow, okay. So in other words, there's a high likelihood we'll have a tropical storm. But keep in mind too, climatology is almost 90%. We kind of know that. Living in Florida, that's life. And we even say here on Bay News 9, folks, it's not always a bad thing to get a tropical storm. Usually, climatologically speaking, we get our tropical storms in May or early June. And they can be drought busters, and they can be really good for our aquifers and good for our area. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens this year. And boom, you've already gotten a tropical storm. You've already checked off the list, a name, and you've already gotten your probability up there. So yes, the statistics are running higher this year, as you would expect them to. But no, I don't see them off the charts like last year. I see it more being one of those situations where I see one or two making a run at the U.S. where we're going to be worried. That's what I see. This is what I would call a water temperature heat potential map. That's the best way I know to put it. Think of it like this. Do you see the reds and the yellows and the oranges on the map? Okay, so the blue is obviously the water, and then where you see the oranges, the yellows, and the reds, that's where there's warmer water at a deeper depth. And it's a little bit above average compared to your cooler years. So what we do is we look for these years when the water is warmer across that section of the Caribbean and the South Central Atlantic. And we compare it to those analog years. So there's 2017. I'll go back and forth so you can see them. Okay, 2017. There's now. 2017. There's now. You see they're similar. Okay, so what we start to do is, that's what we mean when we say we start to put together analog years. What was the El Nino like back then? What was the La Nina like back then? What were the water temperatures in the Pacific? What were the water temperatures like in the Atlantic? This is how we do it. We start to look through. This is right now, the temperatures are running above average where you see the circled orange color with the 1, and below average where you see the circled 0 and blue. So they're kind of below average on the East Coast, a little bit below average in the Caribbean, below average in the Atlantic and on the coast of Africa, but above average for the North Atlantic. That's interesting because let's go back to 2017. It was almost fully reversed. Lots of above average, but it was above average in the Atlantic, what we call main development region, and below average in the North Atlantic. Huh, interesting. So sometimes we don't know everything that's going on out there. Actually, a lot of the times we're just kind of like Michael said at the beginning of this talk. When I was growing up, I mean, I still watched a magician on TV that called himself the weatherman, and he took a magnet and he flung it up on a magnetic board, and he was like, hey, tomorrow's sunshine, and it'd be raining the next day. I mean, that wasn't that long ago. In 40 years, we can now tell you with really high accuracy the forecast out to 4 and 5 days. Obviously, after 7 days, it starts to get iffy, but that makes sense. So we do a really good job, and we know a lot more about the atmosphere. But here's where we still need to learn a lot more. There are things called circulations. This one is the thermohaline circulation that we were learning a lot more about just in the past 20 years in the Atlantic. It actually goes all the way around the globe. Well, all we're concerned about is what it does in the Atlantic. And it is responsible for the transport of water. And it is also responsible for salinity changes in the water, which therefore, if you go back to your physics classes and chemistry classes from college, if you change salinity, you change densities. If you change densities, you start to change the water and the atmosphere above it. So what we're learning is it's not just atmosphere, it's not just ocean, it's all these relationships and how they play with each other. And as this changes, the atmosphere changes. And as the atmosphere changes, this changes. And so we try to figure out what it's doing. And right now it's sending us a signal that the high pressure that typically sits out here, the subtropical high, is weaker than in the stronger years, which therefore leads to weaker trade winds coming across the Atlantic. And therefore, it will not stir up the ocean as much. Not good for us. That usually means the tropical storms, therefore, have a more stable environment to grow. Doesn't guarantee it. Again, this is just a global scale thing. It has nothing to do with what we're actually going to see in July, August, September, and October. It's more of trying to pick out statistical numbers. I talked a little bit about this, I think it was 2 years ago at your talk, about how we're also starting to combine the thermohaline circulation with general up and down patterns. It does not guarantee you will not be hit by a big storm, and it does not guarantee that you will have quiet years. All we're starting to try and do, though, is figure out, are there busier periods and what's causing them? And we're starting to realize there definitely are busier periods. We just haven't put it all together, but we're starting to figure out, okay, there's some pieces in here that we're missing. And for some reason, things are going up and down and oscillating, and maybe we just don't know everything yet. But again, I don't want to make it sound like it's right or wrong, my way or the highway, because, and what I mean by that is, even in the lower years, like take 1989, for example, the blue shaded area in 1989. Okay, that was actually a pretty quiet year. That was Hurricane Hugo. It devastated South Carolina and went all the way up through the mid-Atlantic. So that's a perfect example of, as research scientists and meteorologists looking at the global scale, we try to pick up on big features, but it doesn't mean you're not going to get hit with a hurricane. All right, let's go to what everybody talks about, El Nino and La Nina. We have been in a La Nina. That is Pacific Ocean, okay? So as their water temperatures change, it fluctuates between El Nino and La Nina, back and forth, back and forth. We are just realizing this now after 25, 30 years of having really good research now. We're realizing, oh, it's very normal for it to go up and down. We still don't understand why it fluctuates, and we don't understand why sometimes the El Nino will last for 1 or 2 years. Sometimes it will last for 3 or 4 years. Sometimes it lasts a very short amount of time and goes up and down quick. Well, the La Nina now has lasted for about 1.5 years. And when you get a La Nina in the Pacific, you get more hurricanes in the Atlantic. Okay. The La Nina is finally starting to loosen its grip. So what you're looking at here is computer models saying it likely will all head back towards what we call a neutral state. Maybe not La Nina, but maybe not El Nino either. On the top there is one model that is actually one of our better models, and it says we will head towards an El Nino. I don't think we will that quick. I just don't. It's way too fast. If we did, that would bode well for us, but I don't think we will. So when you listen to Colorado State's, the experts in the field, the Dr. Klotzbachs, and you see their forecast, what they're hinging on is we're probably going away from La Nina, so it probably won't be as busy as last season, but we're probably not headed towards El Nino. And the reason why, if you ever want to know why does a meteorologist want El Nino if they live in the Atlantic side of things, it's because when they're warm and they get lots of tropical storms, we don't, because there's more wind shear coming across the Atlantic, and it disrupts tropical storms and it disrupts our water temperatures, and everything tends to go down on our side of the basin. Okay. So that's why all of a sudden you hear a meteorologist going, come on, El Nino. And it just doesn't look like we're headed there that quick, maybe in a year or two. So you want the strong upper level winds to tear apart the tops of the tropical storms. That's what you want. All right, last thing I'll end with, okay? And then we'll take some questions, or we'll just give it back to Michael. I've talked about global things. I've talked about large scale things. That's what the Klotzbachs, that's what the big universities do. And they put out these general forecasts. Even they will admit, yeah, there might be a 65% chance of having above average normal activity. But we are not yet at the point, we're getting closer, but we're not yet at the point where we can say, even if we're right and we are above average, will it be Texas that gets picked on this year? Will it be North Carolina? Will it be Florida? We're not there yet. There were some hints saying the Gulf of Mexico would be active last year, but even that doesn't narrow it down. I mean, that's still a big body of water. So what we do is we look at things like this. This is called the Madden-Julian Oscillation. You will hear us refer to it as the MJO. And what it does is it is a rotating pattern that goes around the globe. Always. It's always in movement. And when it passes, I guess you could say, your hemisphere, your region, your basin, it causes upward movement. In meteorology, when you have upward motion, that means your hurricanes are growing, your thunderstorms are growing, everything's growing. So you don't want this in your area in September, October. You don't want it, because that's when it tends to instigate more lift and more tropical storms. And what we noticed last season was, remember how I showed you all those 30 storms, and I showed you tons and tons and tons of them out there in the middle of nowhere. And I was like, I just flew through them, right? I did that deliberately because I wanted to show you how many little storms meant nothing last season. 26 of the storms last season, or what, 24 of the storms last season, nobody cared about at all. Nobody cared. But when those 6 just happened to come closer to the US and an MJO pattern was passing, they blew up. And I don't mean they blew up like went away. I mean, they like exploded into a strong storm. So we're getting better at this research, and we're realizing we really need to key in on this. We really need to watch this. So you will hear me this season on Bay News 9, even though my bosses don't like it when I get too techie. You will hear me say, ooh, I don't like what I'm seeing in 2 weeks from now. There's an MJO coming, and there could be a tropical wave. So we got to watch out for stuff like that. Okay, that's what we're going to be, I would say the next 20 to 30 years, that's what we're going to start honing in on, is stuff like that is more regional based with the global stuff. And we'll be able to start giving like 3 and 4 week forecasts for, watch out for this region in this area, because the storms are going to be coming through that area at the wrong time. All right, gang, what we got?
Well, Brian, that was really, really great information. I really appreciate it. I'm sure our audience does as well. I've got a couple of comments based on what you said in questions, and then I think maybe our panelists or some of the audience might as well. You know, your comments about not crying wolf and trying to put it in the right perspective for people, I think is extremely important. I think that's one of the things that we worry about as government officials, is people becoming complacent because, you know, oh well, we've cried wolf so many times that we don't need to need to worry about it. Unfortunately, last year proved everybody a little bit wrong, because Ada did cause damage. We had over 200 homes in Redington Shores that received anywhere from a couple of inches to a foot and a half of water. And if you've got a few inches or a foot in your home, that is severely disruptive and severe devastation. So, I think those who have lived here for a while and have gone through storms, they do get a little complacent. So it's important to get the right message out there. I think one of the things that causes us concern too is Florida its population is just exploding. And we have people moving here from all over the country and northern states that are familiar with dealing with tornadoes, but not so much with hurricanes. And so educating them is extremely important as well. The other comment I wanted to mention, and I think Chief Burford will probably pipe in on this as well, is your comments about fire and the danger that occurs that way. I think that was one of our concerns with Ada, with the flooding that we had, was rising water, people who had circuits that weren't ground fault protected, and the danger of injury because of that. Isn't that correct, Chief?
That's absolutely true. We ended up with a number of responses for reports of structure fires, people seeing sparking outlets and getting very concerned. And some of those basic homeowner type responsibilities, I think we need to really think about teaching folks about how to shut off breakers, how to shut off the main power to their own homes. These kinds of preparation items that I think we need to include in our regular hurricane preparedness, because you're right, it could have been avoided. You don't really need to evacuate an 18 inches of water if there's no fear of electricity, so.
Okay, so I'd ask any of the other panelists if you have questions or comments for Brian. If you do, pipe up. If not, Sherry will ask if anyone in the listening audience does.
And I'll add to what you guys have just said. I totally agree, Michael, and I'm open to suggestions. And I've been doing this 20, 21, 22, 23 years, something like that. And I still feel young, but it's interesting. I've lived on the coast of Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, all get hit a lot. And I don't, it's so hard to walk that fine line of don't hype, but hey, you're on a barrier island. You're different from that person that's inland at 20 feet high. And I don't know how to get that message across, especially in my field when I'm talking to 3-4 million people. They're all watching Bay News 9, and so there's millions of people watching. And it's so hard for me to go on and say, Ada is going to be horrible, folks. I mean, your home's going to be in bad shape if you do not take precautions, because 98% of the area will go, shut up. This is just a little tropical storm that's weakening. But I knew going into it, I was like, oh, barrier islands, it doesn't matter what you call it. It's semantics when it gets down to tropical storm, hurricane, and people will hinge on every word you say. And if you say, well, it's going to drop from a hurricane to a tropical storm, they'll be like, I don't care. Doesn't matter. I'm headed out to the beach to go surfing now. This will be fun. And it's like, oh my gosh, there can be so many issues if you're on a barrier island. It's like you're a different world on a barrier island. And the people, you're exactly right, Michael, they need to be educated coming down from the north or even coming from the panhandle. They need to understand it's a different world on a barrier island.
Yes, it absolutely is. And I think that you and your fellow meteorologists at Bay News 9 do a great job of striking that balance. That's why I have your app on my phone, and I count on your reports, and I know a lot of folks do. Any other questions for Brian before we move on a bit? Brian, I really want to thank you for joining us this evening. I think you're right in the middle of doing weather reports for the nightly news now, and I don't want you to miss your weather on the nines. So if I know if you log off, I'll understand why. We're going to get into some other preparedness stuff. You're welcome to stay, obviously, but again, we understand what your schedule's like, and appreciate your being here.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. I greatly appreciate it. If you guys need anything in the future, even if it's just a comment like, hey, can you spread this to Bay News 9? Feel free to reach out to me. Seriously. I have lots of contacts at the Barrier Islands. I love helping you guys out. So please don't hesitate to reach out. I know we did a lot of stories after Ada down there trying to get the word out about file the flood claims, file it. So, you know, we can help with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's another interesting point, because we're also blessed in Redington Shores that we have Pinellas County flood plain administrator Lisa Foster, who's a resident of our town. And so she stays very close with it, and she can tell you the same thing, that we had some difficulty throughout the county in getting reports in order to get some federal relief for that. So that's disappointing that didn't happen. So we will rely on you next time. We'll remember to get that message to you.
Absolutely. All right, gang, if you think of any other questions, feel free to send them to me. I might just stay on, but I might be walking back and forth. So don't be offended if I am walking in and out.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Brian's told us what we need to be prepared for and what to expect when a hurricane comes. I want to talk now a little bit about preparedness, and I want to talk a bit about what your agencies do, particularly the police, sheriff, and fire rescue. So we got a tropical storm coming, about to, words out there, 3 or 4 days out. Captain Smith, what is it that Indian Shores is doing, the PD?
Well, the first thing we'll do is start getting our own equipment ready, gas, fuel, things we need like that. But we'll start going through the neighborhoods and asking people to secure debris, things in their yards, get, chairs, take things in out of the yard that'll fly around, things around their houses that become flying debris is important. Once the wind gets to a certain point, they won't be able to do that so much anymore. So we'll spend a lot of time in the back streets, especially down there in Redington Shores, letting people know. And then when we get to the point where if they're going to call for an evacuation, then we'll try to get as many people off the island as possible and try to convince as many people to go. I've talked to a lot of people out here that just aren't going to go anywhere, and they're set on staying. And we try hard to convince them that's not the best idea. And some of them are set in their ways. So we try as best we can to identify where those people live. And when we get back into a mode that we're back on the island, if it is that bad or the water rises, that we at least know where to go to try to find people that stayed. But we don't want people to stay once they call evacuation. And we don't want a lot of flying debris around either. So that's a big thing for us.
Yeah, that's a good point on the flying debris. Last year, the town of Redington Shores passed an ordinance number 20-04 that requires people to clear anything on their property that could become airborne during high wind, that they secure it. And that needs to be done where the National Weather Service, National Hurricane Center, or an appropriate weather agency has issued a high wind warning, a tropical storm warning, or a hurricane warning. I know there's that fine line between people wanting to leave and to stay ahead of a storm. And so I want to ask Sergeant Luckett and Corporal Mellenbach, one of the issues is when we have an evacuation ordered, obviously, Indian Shores Police Department's going to do what they can to get people out. The sheriff's really going to control access in and out. So talk to us about the reentry passes, how that system works as intended to work, and how people sign up for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Before Corporal Nellenbach talks about that a little bit, I do want to echo what the captain had said. You know, at the sheriff's office, Sheriff Belteri's had us working on our preparation and getting ready for these possible storms already for weeks. And I think it's just as important to echo that and remind our residents and all the residents of Pinellas County that they really need to start doing that now. Have those plans in place, start working on identifying those essential things that they'll need if they have to leave in a hurry during that evacuation order. You're exactly right. We're going to use our resources to put in place security, which is really what that barrier island reentry program is. And a lot of people don't realize that. It's not in place to make people leave. It's to let them understand that they can leave without having to worry about their homes from a theft or a safety aspect. That we're going to do everything we can with the local police departments to restrict people that don't belong in the neighborhoods from not being in the neighborhoods. So their part really is to know we're doing that to make them feel comfortable, to allow them when these evacuation orders come down to know that they can leave and not worry about that property. Now, the storm, obviously a different area. That's what the storm does afterwards. We want to get in there, and the corporal will talk in a minute. People don't sometimes understand why they can't get back in after a storm. And there's two parts to this. During the storm itself, it reaches a point when these winds start hitting 60, 70, 75 miles an hour that it's not safe for our equipment, the fire trucks, the police vehicles to get out on the road. So that makes it very difficult. It's not that we don't want to physically because of these storms, we can't. The other problem becomes now post-storm, we take our time to do assessments and clear roads. If trees are down, power lines are down, it still may limit how quickly we can get to your residents to help them. So the more that leave, the less that are there for us to have to get in those extremely dangerous conditions to try to rescue. And I think that's where the Barrier Island reentry program really benefits you. And I'll let the corporal talk more specifically about that.
So with the Barrier Island reentry program, the key thing to note on it is each residence can have up to 2 passes, and they can apply online or they can come into each one of their cities and apply to get a permit. When you're coming back in after a storm or you want to gain entry, once we've basically put up, there's 8 locations, strategic locations and at the bridges to get onto the barrier islands. And that's where we restrict access. To do that, the passes, once you want to come back in, there'll be, we kind of call it like a fast lane. So the lane where you have a pass, and then there's people that don't have passes, but still need to get entry onto the islands. And we understand that. So just because you don't have a pass doesn't mean you can't get back in. It just means you're going to be vetted more. We're going to, check your name, make sure you have a reason to be out there. So it takes a little longer. Whereas with a pass, you come into, you see a deputy, they scan your pass, they check your ID, and you go. And that is a twofold thing. Number one, it also allows us to know how many people are on the island. And then you're also checked when you come off. So in a situation where you can't stay down there, we're not allowing people to stay down there, things are too dangerous, but we understand people want to get in and see their homes. Then we'll allow them in and then ask them to leave again, that type of thing. And they're checked off so we can understand who's on the island, who's not. And we can restrict access to those people that aren't supposed to be down there.
Thank you. That is probably one of the most frequent questions that we receive at town hall when hurricane season rolls around is reentry passes. One thing, those remain valid too. They don't have to they're not being reissued every year. So until the sheriff decides until there's a decision to change those in any way, those ones that are out there are still valid. So yeah, we get a lot of questions about that. And yes, we do encourage people to leave, particularly when there's an evacuation order, because that means we're going to have some likely catastrophic damage to the system, One of our real problems in Redington Shores that people don't understand is our sewer system and our lift stations. Our lift stations can get flooded out quite easily as well. And when you have people back in their condos, back in their homes, washing clothes, taking showers, doing whatever, that puts burden on the sewer system. And we had that with Irma, as a matter of fact, sewers backing up and causing some serious health issues. So that's important. I'm going to talk about planning here in just a minute, and what should go into a good hurricane preparedness plan. But I want to shift over to Chief Burford again. You know, one of the critical responsibilities that you have ahead of a storm, particularly, is helping evacuation of people that need assistance, and also continuing to respond to calls for service, right?
Correct, absolutely. And I'm going to take a similar approach as the corporal, that we are starting our planning and have been doing it for the last several weeks, and it will go on throughout the season. But what you're referring to is an update of our special needs database. And this is something that we do every year. The special needs database is actually a Pinellas County program, and it's a system that provides emergency sheltering for those folks that have certain kinds of medical conditions. It's somewhat limited, but it's for people with medical conditions and no transportation. So this is for our really vulnerable population of folks. You can actually register through Pinellas County to be a part of this program. And each year we update that database and make sure that you're still interested in being called to see if you need help in a named storm. To give you an idea of how big this is, our fire district, which includes the 3 Redingtons, including Redington Shores, about 25 square miles, about 100,000 people or so. We have 250 people currently in our special needs database. And each year we reach out to them. That's what we're doing right now. We touch base. We see if their conditions have changed, if they're still interested in being part of the program. And then we'll call them, depending on the level of evacuation, we'll actually call them, get them ready, and then be a part of moving out and actually picking them up and getting them to the special needs shelters, which are located throughout Pinellas County. That's an important part of the pre-work that we do. In addition to things like reviewing our emergency operation plans. I know, Vice Mayor, you were over at our Emergency Operations Center the other day. We get in there this time of year. We start it up. We make sure everything is working. We take a good look at all of our city facilities, including our fire stations, making sure things like generators are working and windows are intact. The trees are trimmed around our buildings. All the things that we would expect residents to do, we're doing ourselves as well. And we're reminding our employees, it is so important that our employees understand that they're critical when these incidents occur and when a disaster is declared. They're mandated to come back. And that means that we have to remind them to also take care of their families. Their families may be weeks without them, and they have to be able to work in a manner so that they know that their family is okay and they're safe. That's an important piece. And, just as we talked about so many folks coming down from the north, moving into this area, we're hiring people from outside of the state as well. So our training has really changed to include a lot of that information as well. So a lot goes in before the season even starts or as the season gets going, and then a lot happening. We're monitoring all of the notification systems. We're working with the county and attending what are called response operation committee meetings, rock calls. We're listening to what emergency management has to say. We're listening to what kind of preparation is underway. Again, we're really honing in on our infrastructure, what's going on, fueling up vehicles, topping off our fuel tanks, notifying employees when to come in. We're working with our city council, and I know that the commission as well, in terms of any disaster declarations that need to be made. And then we're getting into that EOC. We're activating our CERT team to help out, our community emergency response team, where they can help out as well. Lot that goes into actually, once a named storm is out there and things that get ready for that arrival, lot that go on, including shelter operations. We even take our staff and assign our staff to various shelters within our fire district as well. So a lot of preparation that goes on.
Hey, and I want to thank your officers for their help with delivering COVID vaccine. As a matter of fact, I showed up in Pinellas Park, and it was one of your officers that gave me my first shot here a couple months ago. So I appreciated that. But you all know my background in law enforcement. I certainly appreciate the efforts of our first responders, all of you on the call, and those that aren't on the call. And I know it can be frustrating for all of you trying to get the message out to the public that they need to take these storms seriously, and they need to go when they're told to go. People don't really need to drive to Tennessee to get out of the way of a storm. They just need to get on higher ground, and sometimes that just means getting off the barrier island, because there will come a time from all of you that you are no longer available to assist them, correct?
Yeah, I think that the sheriff's office mentioned that earlier. You know, for us, with some of our larger vehicles, we are taking certain types of apparatus, like a ladder truck, you know, the larger vehicles that have ladders on top of them, out of service when sustained winds reach 35 miles an hour. And really, that's not much. As the corporal mentioned, 75-mile-an-hour sustained winds. Our policies take apparatus completely. All fire department response across the county will come out of service. And that is hard to explain to people. The 911 calls keep coming in, and yet for a dispatcher to have to tell a family whose home is on fire or whose loved one is sick that we're not responding is absolutely heartbreaking. But people need to understand that we have limitations as well.
Great. Well, you know, there's that old adage that proper preparation prevents poor performance. And there's a couple of other words that normally go into that statement as well, but it is a fact. And one of the things that is important for everyone to do, for yourself, for your family, and your pets ahead of hurricane season, is to make sure that you have a plan in place. And I'll tell you, an excellent way to put your plan into place and or to dust the plan that you have off, to make sure that you have everything included in it, is to download the app Ready Pinellas. Ready Pinellas. You can get it at the Apple App Store, or you can get it at Google Play, or you can go to Pinellas County / Ready Alert, I think, or Pinellas County, you'll find it. But anyway, it will walk you through setting up your personal hurricane preparedness plan. You add just a little bit of data, how many members in your family, whether you have pets, who your contact person is, where you would be relocated, where you intend to relocate if you have to evacuate. All that goes into place, and what comes out on the other end is checklists to remind you of what you need to do ahead of time to be prepared, what you need to include in your survival kit, and what needs to be done to protect your family. So I'm really impressed with it. I think it's a tremendous tool that Pinellas County has given us. That's Ready Pinellas, and I would encourage everybody to sign up for it. I've got my son and his family in Madeira hooked into it, and hope everybody else does as well. You know, one of the things that people don't think about sometimes when they're preparing for a storm is how is it that I need to be protecting myself from damage, and what sort of insurance coverage am I going to have, and what should I be doing ahead of the storm to prepare for that, and what should I be doing after the fact to report it. I know there was a lot of that went on with Tropical Storm Ada, Kim Haar. So I'm going to turn it over to you for a bit to talk about that.
Sure. Thank you very much. Absolutely. Ada definitely gave us an opportunity to understand and kind of learn firsthand what we've done well and what we need to do better at going forward in our preparations. And being able to have this talk now. I know some of our participants might have been at our workshop, but for those that weren't, we did learn a lot about how to be better prepared. And what I'm going to try to focus on real quick, because we're in the beginning of hurricane season, what I really want people to walk away with today or tonight is, what do I need to do with regards to my insurance? And what do I need to do to make sure I am prepared? So if we do have an event, I am not flustered and wondering, what do I do next? So I'm going to share a screen real quick, and I tried to make this very quick, very simple for our viewers tonight. And when we're talking about our insurance, I really want everybody to look at their policies this year before the storm season comes to make sure they know what they have. Okay, and when we're talking about that, I mean, as far as your dwelling coverage or even commercial property, do you have replacement costs? Do you have actual cash value? And understand that there's a difference between your homeowner's insurance policy and your flood insurance policy. And after Ada, we really only had, the majority of our damage was from flood. So, you know, we were really talking about the flood policy, but the coverages are different under the homeowners, and knowing what those differences are will help you. For other structures, do you have a detached garage? Do you have sheds, fences, things of that nature? You know, whereas these coverages might be under your homeowners, they're not going to be under a flood policy. So there's differences. Personal property, like your appliances, your furniture, your clothing. On the homeowner policy, you have a choice to have that covered as replacement or as actual cash value. Big difference in those two coverages. Big difference in what you're going to get for your personal property. Do you even have personal property? A lot of folks will use this particular coverage line as a cost savings measure. And it's one of those that this year you might want to reconsider that after knowing how much damage was from the flood insurance after Ada. Also, loss of use is on policies, but it's not on the flood policy. So that's a coverage that a lot of people, I think, were really surprised to find out was that they didn't have after their flood, because when they went to a hotel, they actually had to pay for that bill out of their own pocket. So if you have wind damage or property damage, you know, there is that coverage. So I really encourage everyone to get your policies out, take a look at your coverages, the differences between the two, and that's a great place to start for knowing any differences that you need to make. Also, what did we learn? What to do before the storm? Record keeping, making sure you have phone numbers of who your insurance companies are. And when I say companies, because the home might be different than the flood insurance. Know your websites, know your phone numbers, your claims numbers, all that information up front. Have copies of your policies and make sure they're in a safe place. I can't express enough the importance of doing a detailed inventory of your household items. And don't forget closets and drawers. And the best way to do that is to take photos, videos, receipts, anything that you have from repairs that you've done to your property. Maybe you've done some remodeling. It's amazing how repairs and receipts matter at the end of the day. Take photos of serial numbers of your large appliances, because it's probably going to be a lot easier to get to those before than after. And making sure that you just know everything like that you have. And when you think you've taken enough photos, take some more photos. Like I said, especially of hidden items, because ultimately it's going to become necessary to have an inventory of all of your belongings, and making sure that you keep your records in a fireproof safe, or your birth certificates, passports, wills, you know, if you're not expecting to get water, or if you're not expecting your roof to get blown off, and all of a sudden you have this kind of damage, you know, are you going to know where these items are, and are they going to be safe and protected from damage? Also, after Ada, restoration companies, a lot of homeowner companies will dispatch restoration, but if you're just talking about flooding, that's going to be up to you to get a flood company, restoration company out there. So it's probably a good idea to do a little research ahead of time, to have a name and number for multiple restoration companies available. And last but not least, making sure, like they said, you're securing your home and securing your property, and making sure that those flying debris items are not there. But you know, these are the things right now. This year, I think it will help people tremendously if they take a moment to do these things, and then that will help them going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Kim. We certainly appreciate that. In a minute, I want to open it up for questions if anybody from the audience has any. But just a couple of other comments that I want to make. Kim, you're absolutely right that the record keeping is extremely important. I lost a home and personal property in Katrina, and I had other friends that had damage as well. I had good records before the storm and had good records and photographs after. My claim was settled without dispute rather rapidly. Others that didn't have those records, that can delay the process, not because insurance companies are trying to prevent paying you off, but because there are a lot of claims, there's a lot of work, and those that have done the best job of documenting it breeze through the system. So I'd encourage people to do that. There are a lot of things that homeowners can do now in all year long to mitigate dangers that their home has by, you know, raising and elevating their air conditioning systems and cleaning up around their home, just getting it set, replacing their windows with wind-resistant hurricane windows, or putting shutters up ahead of time. It's a lot easier to do that ahead of time than it is to wish that you had done it before. There are some advantages to doing that, to building smart, and I'd encourage everybody to do that. Prepare not just for themselves and their family and their pets, but prepare and protect their home as well. The town of Redington Shores just has a ton of valuable information about every topic under the sun when it comes to protecting yourself from flood, understanding flood insurance, understanding what you should be doing to protect your pets during a storm, what you should be doing if you have disabilities, or how to sign up for those services. The Hurricane Preparedness Guide that comes out every year from Pinellas County has just a ton of valuable information. You can go to our website and gather that information, or you can stop in at Town Hall. We're slightly more open today than what we were a week or two ago, so we appreciate seeing some of our residents come in and make themselves available, ask questions in person, or pick up a few of those items. So before we end, Sherry, I want to open it up to see if there's anyone that has any questions from the audience, but then also ask our participants, our panelists, if they have any final comments that they'd like to share.
If anyone has any questions, who's an attendee, please raise your hand. Just hit the icon that looks like a hand on your screen. It doesn't look like we have any questions at this time.
Great. So any final comments from any of our panelists?
I do, Commissioner Robinson. I just want to make sure we talked a little bit about what people need to do beforehand with regards to the insurance and everything. But I just want to make sure after the fact that I just touch on one of the key items, the key things that we learned is taking photos after the fact of the damage, photos of everything. And even if you start to dry things out and start to get rid of things, keeping samples, taking pictures of the drywall where they cut the drywall out and there's insulation behind the drywall, taking a picture of that. Anything that is basically removed from the house, you need to make sure that you're keeping samples of. And actually getting rid of water items and things out of the house is important, because from a health standpoint, you don't want mold to start growing. So it's just as critical to take the photos after as it is before. And as Lisa Foster says, and just when you think you've taken enough photos, take even more. So those, I just want to make sure that, we kind of get that in there too, because after the fact, a lot of folks really weren't sure what to do. And that's really important.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And for us also, after a storm, and we did this after Ada, is that we, as the municipality working with Pinellas County, do a damage assessment. We do that by driving down the streets. We don't go on personal property. We can't do that. So all of the damage that we're noting, or homes that were damaged, we're doing that from the street. So we're looking for the water level, if it was flood damage against the house, or damage to roofs or to structures that way. But we don't know all the damage that occurred. It's really, really important for residents, when they do suffer damage from one of these events, that they contact Town Hall and report that to us, so we can include that in our damage assessment. That is critically important to getting relief from the state and federal government when we have a catastrophic event. We did not get relief from Ada because we didn't have enough damage. We didn't have enough damage reports. I think if we had all of those reports in, we would have fared much better in the county in getting that. So anything else from anyone?
Vice Mayor, I just wanted to thank you on behalf of the Sheriff's Office for having us and putting this together tonight. Last thing I wanted to say is obviously to echo what the corporal said. If anybody does want the information on the reentry program, they can go to the website that we have, or obviously at City Hall there in Redington Shores. The website, if anybody wants it, is www.pcsoweb.com. So if they want to do it online, they can do that as well. And we just, like in person, have to have their 2 forms of ID to do that.
Yep. Thank you very much, Sarge. Anything else?
Vice Mayor, thank you for having me. As everyone's aware, Seminole is one of 2 fire departments that serves your area for fire and EMS services. And I know I speak on behalf of Madeira Beach as well, that if individual communities wanted us to come out and do presentations on a smaller scale, we're always happy to do that. We're going to try our best to do what we can for folks during these incidents. Please be patient with all of the emergency responses and responders after an incident. I know that everyone wants their problem fixed right away. We prioritize where we need to be and who we need to be helping based on severity. So people need to understand that we're going to do our best, but there's a lot of work out there when these storms come through. So thanks again for having me.
Thank you. And thank all of our panelists. The last thing I will mention is that this evening's event has been recorded. So if you know folks or neighbors who have not, were not able to tune in or join us tonight, they can access that through our website. So I would encourage folks to do that. I hope everyone has a safe and prepared hurricane season. And again, I thank our first responders, particularly police, this being National Police Week. And I salute you all. Thank you very much. And thank you, Kim, for being here as well. And with that, we'll end the program for this evening. Thanks again.
Good job.